I spend thousands of hours every year putting together withdrawal strategies for those retiring early or wanting to retire early. And we do so in a way that helps people really optimize what they've saved so they can start to enjoy their savings and also not run the risk of running out of money. So in this video, I'll show you a real life case study using the methodology we have used with hundreds of retirees to help them avoid spending too much too early on if they retire early and have a much longer retirement period than the average person. And we're going to walk through some of the options and levers we can pull for making this plan really robust. And I'm going to show you some of the advice that was given so that maybe you can start to think about creating an optimal withdrawal strategy for your own situation. So let's jump into the details. This is Mike. Now, a lot of you have been requesting case studies for people that are single, and you'll kind of see how there's a different planning approach here. But if you're not single, the factors I go through are said to be very important for you to understand. So I changed the name for privacy, of course, but there are a few assumptions that we should be looking at. So first off, Mike is 57 years old. He has kids, they're young adults, but they're doing pretty well financially. But he has total assets of around $3.1 million, which consists of about $150,000 in cash, about $1.2 million in a brokerage account, $1.3 million in 401ks, and then he had another old $400,000 rollover IRA. So total investments as far as retirement income goes is about $3.1 million. Next, let's go through his goals. Number one, he wants to make sure he has enough assets to take care of himself if things were to happen, right? Nobody wants to be a burden to their kids, so we're going to factor that into his spending. He also wants to maintain his lifestyle in retirement. He wants to spend at least $10,000 per month after tax. And then lastly, he wants to have some room in his plan, of course, if he wants to go take a big trip or go make a big purchase. And he's fine going back to work if he can't accomplish these things. So he just wants the clarity in order to make that decision. Now, my job and something that I do every day is take someone's goals and look at it objectively and really tell people realistically, hey, you can retire early. Maybe you should go back to work, but not just saying, yeah, go trust me, yeah, you're good, but have a really well thought out strategy behind it so you can avoid some of the biggest mistakes. And once we understand their goals, from there we can strategize what we need to do to make this a reality. And we're going to dig into how this withdrawal strategy played out for Mike as we go through the rest of this video. So continue to stick around to the end. So as far as retirement income goes, like most people, he doesn't have a pension. He doesn't have real estate rental income. He's going to solely rely on Social Security, around $48,000 per year, as well as his investment portfolio. So when it comes to Social Security, he wants to take it earlier. Of course, there's a lot that goes into that decision. So for his plan, he decided to take it at 62. Okay, next, something really important that we need to talk about is expenses. Like I mentioned, he wants about $10,000 net after tax for things like food, travel, entertainment. And I also mentioned his goals to maintain his standard of living and not cut back in retirement. So we know what he wants to spend. We know what he's trying to accomplish. But before we get into the withdrawal strategy, let's look at a huge piece of the puzzle for making sure he can spend what he wants to spend over the next 3 to 4 decades. And we're going to look at the investment portfolio and understand how do we design it in a way that can create that income consistently for the next 35 plus years. So this is not an investment recommendation or the investments used, but what I'm going to do is show you how I think about portfolio strategy for an early retirement. So overall, of the $3 million portfolio, before we can even take a look at if the spending is sustainable, we have to make sure the investments are positioned with the assets to create income. Like many people that come to me, they've done a great job saving and their portfolio was great for the accumulation phase, but it's an entirely different ballgame now that you need to go through the decumulation phase. And we follow the philosophy of having multiple asset classes when funding your retirement. And these portfolio management rules have shown to increase the amount you can safely create from a portfolio historically. I'll include the link to that research in the show notes, but let me show you how we apply this to Mike's portfolio. At the top here, again, these aren't the investments used, and this isn't advice, but as you can see here, as far as equities, right, the things that are going to be the growth engine over your retirement, we've got US markets, international markets, small cap, emerging markets. We have multiple asset classes. And the reason why this can be optimal is because we don't know what the best asset class is going to be over the course of your retirement. So say hypothetically, right, this is our target weighting for a $3 million portfolio. Again, this is not a recommendation. How do you create income from this? What this tells me is that in a year where a specific equity asset class has a positive return, for example, let's say US did really well, and now the weighting of Mike's US stock exposure is in excess of his target allocation, the amount that is above the target, we can sell and use those proceeds to meet Mike's withdrawal requirements. And the same thing can apply to other equity asset classes that end up performing well and going above their target. The key behind this research is having multiple return streams that can perform differently, because again, we don't know what the next outperforming sector or asset class will be. So we want to build a portfolio to optimize. Now, what happens if I need to create income for Mike and the stock market is down? That's when we don't want to take withdrawals from any sort of equity class that is down, and we have cash or fixed income there to meet that withdrawal requirement. You can see here we have a money market fund, short-term bonds, and treasuries that aren't going to grow a ton, but they're going to be there for you as an emergency fund when, not if, the stock market has a correction during your retirement. So again, this is a simple framework we use when building out a portfolio. There's a lot that goes into this, but the decision rules can help you apply this to your own portfolio strategy as far as what assets to sell. So understanding this framework for what asset classes to sell can make a big difference. But let's talk about how to make sure Mike's spending $10,000 per month is sustainable, especially because he is going to retire early. Now, here's a long-term look at Mike's monthly income over the course of his retirement. As you can see here, the light blue color is the portfolio withdrawal. So say again, he was going to retire next year. This is what it would look like visually. So at the end of this year, he'd be age 58 and we would need to spend around $10,000, a little over $10,000 per month. And that level of income would continue on until he reaches age 62. You can see here, that's when Social Security kicks in. And after that year, you can see that we're going to start to cut his portfolio withdrawals because Social Security is going to replace what he was spending from the portfolio. But this is, again, a flat projection over the course of retirement. Let's take a look at what would happen if the markets were to drop. Now, many of you have probably heard of the 4% rule. I talk about a lot in this videos as well. In the 90s, basically, we went from tape recorders to the CD player, right?
It's called a CD player. It cost me like $700, but the sound quality is outstanding.
Retirement was sort of a newer concept that most people just worked until they died. But despite this leap in technology we have now, when was the last time you used a CD player? Just like your CD player, the 4% rule strategy was the best there was at the time, but now there's a better way, and it's called the risk-based guardrails. While bear markets are never fun, they can especially be destructive in retirement because it's essentially like reverse dollar cost averaging. So in other words, the further down the markets go, the more shares you have to sell in order to make that monthly income, which can result in your nest egg never being able to recover. So this blue dotted line is what we estimate the portfolio to be once he needs to start taking income. You can see right here, the current income of around $10,000 per month. But if his portfolio were to drop to this amount here, around $1.5 million, in order to reduce the risk of him running out of money, he would need to cut his income by about $500 per month until things recover. But on the other hand, for him to have a chance of increasing his income, the portfolio would have to grow. Again, because he's retiring early, it's going to have to grow a decent amount. And the good news about using a system like this is that it's extremely flexible. If he wants to go on that big trip or spend a little bit of money on a big purchase, we simply need to see how this would impact the guardrails, because that's going to impact his monthly income. And you can see here, he has a good buffer before we would have to cut his income if he wanted to make a big expense. This type of flexibility is what makes a huge difference for someone to be able to retire early and avoid depleting their portfolio and avoid running out of money. But the reason most advisors don't use this approach is that it requires a lot more work to manage. But it also requires that when, not if, markets decline, you have to be willing to take a temporary pay cut until things get better. But we're not done quite yet, because we now have a portfolio set up for income. We now have those guardrails in place, so we know what type of adjustment you might have to make. Let's take this one step further and really stress test this plan through some of the worst markets in history. So what you're now looking at is basically a back test of this $10,000 per month monthly income based on the asset classes you invested in and seeing how it would have fared during, for example, the Great Depression. That was a time when the US stock prices lost over 85% from 1929 to 31. US employment reached 25% in 1933, and deflation averaged a negative 6.5% from 1930 to 1933. So inflation is pretty relevant today. So the blue line is the actual income, saying if Mike retired right before the Great Depression, what would happen to his monthly income based on how he's invested, based on withdrawals. And right away, it's on plan. The light blue line is what we plan to take. The dark blue line is the actual income experience. But you can see that in 1932, he would have to drop his income by about $1,000 per month to make sure he does not do unrecoverable damage to his portfolio. And it's not until 1936 until he can start to have a little bit more income, because that's when the market starts to recover pretty well. You can see that in terms of guardrails we showed you earlier, his guardrails would have dropped to about $900,000 back in the day. And that's when he would need to cut his income. So now this is a worst case scenario. Now I show clients some of these worst case scenarios. He felt like that wouldn't be a problem for him to cut his income during that time. If it meant he could retire early now, others might be, heck no, there's no way I could do that. I can't be that flexible. It's all gonna depend on your situation. But let's test another horrible market that had a lot of inflation. And that was the stagflation era, when inflation peaked at 14%, interest rates around 17% in 1981, and inflation adjusted annual stock returns averaged just 0.8%, which compared to 1983 to 1997 was about 14%. So you can see right away, this is a pretty flat market and not one of the best scenarios to retire in. So in this scenario, you're really not having to deviate far from what you want to spend, but you're not really getting the increase in income until about the mid 80s. It's pretty steady, but you're not getting any sort of significant increase in income until later on retirement, which for Mike, he said that's pretty reasonable. You may have a different take, but this looks pretty good when I'm stress testing all these horrible market periods. I would be worried if I did a stress test and I see a ton of these red lines going every single year. That tells me we need to either spend less or maybe go back to the drawing board. Now, those were two periods where inflation was a huge factor, which was one of Mike's concerns, and we tested other periods, but he felt confident that if he had to adjust his income, he could do it, and the benefits of him retiring early would outweigh the risks of having to slightly cut back his income until things get better. And the good news is, and this is a key for a lot of you trying to put a withdrawal strategy together, if you're willing to be dynamic like Mike, this can really give you a fantastic and robust retirement withdrawal strategy, and he was really excited about it. Now, I just showed you the first iteration of this withdrawal strategy. Everyone has a unique plan, and things are constantly changing. That's why we don't just run off a 4% rule or set a financial plan, print out 1,000 pages and say, just don't change. The most confident people that are able to retire early have a strategy for bad markets. They have an investment strategy to create that consistent income. And they have the expectation that when the next bear market is here, they know what to do. Again, this is Matt Calconi. I'm a certified financial planner and advisor with Wine Degree Advisors. I hope you found this video helpful. We love getting to help people retire every day. If you're looking to optimize your strategy, feel free to click the link in the description below, and me or my team would love to talk with you. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys on the next one.